Welcome to today's ASIF webinar. My name is James Cameron, and on behalf of the Australian Construction Industry Forum, I'm pleased to welcome you to the ASIF webinar on top technology trends in the building construction industry today. Before we start, just a few housekeeping notes. Everyone is in listen-only mode. However, we invite your questions, which can be provided via the questions pane on the GoToWebinar screen, where this arrow is pointing. Today's webinar will be recorded and copies will be available after the webinar. The Australian Construction Industry Forum, or ASIF, is the meeting place for the building and construction industry in Australia. Together, we seek to develop a successful, strong and sustainable construction industry in Australia, identifying cross-industry issues and negotiating policy and advocacy to encourage industry improvement and increased productivity. We are focused on creating a competitive construction and property industry that is a leader in building Australia's prosperity. ASIF members are among the most significant associations in the industry, spanning the entire asset creation process from design, cost planning, construction, building and management. Their support and insight are invaluable. ASIF exists primarily to represent and assist its members and through them the whole construction industry. ASIF is a not-for-profit and support from our partners is vital to our ongoing operation. Cbus Superfund is our principal partner. As an industry superfund, Cbus is focused on maximising retirement incomes for members and making super hassle-free for employers. Cbus leads an exemplary group of organisations who support ASIF's work, including Cordell, Design Build Expo, Pointsbuild, and Viewpoint Construction Software. Our work is only possible with their ongoing financial support, so a very big thank you to all of them. Our presenter today is Michael Tomlinson, who is the Managing Director of Pointsbuild. As the founder of Pointsbuild, Michael is responsible for Pointsbuild's leadership, setting the company strategy and execution of their plans. Michael brings over 16 years experience in the information technology, public sector and telecommunications sectors. With technology, innovation, scalability and sustainability at the forefront of their thinking, Pointsbuild aims to offer their customers a convenient, time-efficient, smart way to learn without having to leave their office or home and any time they choose. Established in late 2006, Pointsbuild was initially founded to provide approved compliance based on training for builders, with a focus on those regional and remote areas for which there has been a distinct lack of credible training and education options. Pointsbuild has grown from one of Australia's first approved continuing professional development training providers in the Australian building construction industry to now being the leader of online CPD education and training services across Australia for construction and building professionals. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, James and Cheryl, and thank you to all who are attending this afternoon's webinar. Much appreciated. As James mentioned, my name is Michael Tomlinson and I'm the founder and managing director of Pointsbuild. Today's session is on the top technology trends in the building and construction industry, and I'll be giving a general overview on some of the key technology trends as we see them, and invite all attendees to ask questions throughout today's session. And if there's any questions we can't answer, I'll follow up with the audience directly as a result. Just building on James's introduction of myself and Pointsbuild, we're now in our 11th year. We are a provider of online education and training for the building and construction industry, with an Australian focus, but increasingly delivering quality education programs for the building and construction industry online to a growing number of countries around the world. We have over 140 courses and deliver about 30,000 courses each year, and our partnerships are many and varied with a range of government and industry organisations. Probably our key partnership is being the education partner of ACIF. In terms of today's webinar, I want to take a little bit of time to discuss why take an interest in technology, why the world of technology should be important to professionals in the building and construction industry, and then some key trends that we're seeing coming up. The key ones being blockchain, advances in technology and procurement, the rise of 3D printing, lifestyle costing and the assessment and analysis of that, and finally supply chain sustainability. And then to cap things off, what these technologies could mean for you and our industry. And again, feel free to ask any questions using the questions section of the audio conferencing technology that we're using today. So as a starting point, and I should preface, we have a range of attendees today, from licensed and accredited builders, construction industry professionals, educators and academics, as well as from product companies and related industry associations. So today's webinar is attempting to address a range of professionals on the end of the call, so it won't be focused on a specific section of the industry, say for example architects or engineers. It'll cover a range of topics for a range of the audience. What is technology in construction? Or at a high level, it's really the application of technology to the design, construction and operation of buildings. Historically, it's probably been focused on technology, the advancement of individual products or individual processes. So, for example, the rise of technology, cross-laminated timber projects, or the rise of processes such as modular construction or prefabricated construction. Today's session is really less focusing on individual products used in construction or individual processes, and really some of the next generation technologies that are going to impact the whole industry. Next, I want to sort of dwell on and take a few minutes on why take an interest in technology at all. You could probably argue that the construction industry has been fairly impervious to technology advancements in the last few decades. We have had certain technology advancements, prefabricated construction, modular construction, some new technologies, but largely technology has not really made a material impact up until quite recently. The next wave of advancements in our industry will really be technology focused. And it really is an interesting time frame, because how many of us were trained or educated isn't necessarily how things will be done today, let alone into the future. Part of the reason to take an interest in technology is looking at the alarming pace of change in our industry. Technology is driving the pace of change in our industry, and if we don't take an interest in it, we're all collectively at risk of becoming obsolete. Some of the key market drivers of technology in our industry, and this is driving why technology is becoming apparent and why there's quite a growing profile and interest in it. I guess the first and foremost is the need to drive better quality and lower defect constructions. There will always be a commercial driver, either to save money or to make money. In the rise and the ever increasingly competitive world that we operate in, the ability to use technology to drive a competitive advantage, and also to use technology to reduce waste and reduce inefficiencies. just pause for a moment. If anyone has any questions, feel free to use the audio conferencing technology to raise them. If there are any questions that come through, I will read them out and offer a response, if you like. That being said, happy to move on. The top 5 technology trends I'd like us to cover today are the blockchain, advancements in procurement technologies, 3D printing, life cycle costing, and sustainability. For each of these, I will be covering a little bit on what they are, and a quick definition and explanation, and then a discussion on how they're getting applied today and tomorrow into our industry. I guess the first one we want to look at is blockchain. So this is really, and you may have seen this in the press, it's generating a lot more interest, especially in the financial services industries. And it really becomes a new way to store and record transactions. And although historically that's been electronic transactions, increasingly it's a new way to store and record both electronic and digital, as well as physical transactions. It's, in its simplest format, can be explained as a digital ledger where different types of agreements, contracts, financial transactions are recorded and confirmed as completed. In many respects, it will cut out the use of middlemen by having a way of trusted, centralised recording of transactions that a buyer and a seller can use without going through a middleman. So it has implications in the legal aspects of the commercial and the construction industry, as well as the financial aspects of the construction industry. It will speed up transactions. Things like speed up payments for purchasing of construction industry materials or services. It has the advantage, or it has the possible use of streamlining certification. And that can be both product certification, is something fit for being used in a construction project, or it can streamline the certification process in terms of the various stages that a construction or building has to go through to be certified before it moves to completion, if you like. There is another use of blockchain technology around providing evidence of a product or supplier's provenance or origin. So how do you know the origin of a product that you're considering using? The use of blockchain technologies and digital technologies will underpin the move to smart contracts and automate a lot of the contracting process, if you like. This will have the effect of streamlining and speeding up the contracting process, both from a procurement to retaining of master contractor to delivery, as well as even at the lower level, the residential building, the streamlining smart contracts between homeowner, customer and residential builder, if you like. That moves nicely into the next area, which is procurement and electronic invoicing. Historically, procurement and invoicing has been fraught with inefficiencies, not just in terms of inaccuracy, but really about the different ways things are procured and the different ways things are measured in terms of procurement. Advancements in procurement will increase accuracy and lower the risk of default across the supply chains. We have seen for a number of years now, 15 to 20 years, the rise of accepted, what we would call point-to-point invoicing. So invoices generated electronically and received electronically and paid electronically. That's effectively the first generation. But there are still inefficiencies around judgments to do with bills of materials, assessment of those, accounting for those in terms of things like depreciation, and the supply, moving that through the procurement process has often been still inefficient. What we're starting to see now is accepted procurement marketplaces coming into place. And the New South Wales government is starting a project on electronic procurement to rationalise and speed up the supplier-customer process through procurement and electronic invoicing. So where smart procurement is starting to impact the building industry is on electronic invoicing, not just sending a PDF of an invoice, but direct injection into between a customer and a supplier's invoicing systems so that things can get paid quicker. In the world post-construction, where we're looking at facilities management, the ongoing life cycle of a construction or a building, we're looking at automatic smart metering, where rather than making a judgment or an assessment on the metering of energy or water or gas or electricity, that procurement and invoicing systems can meter in real time. And this is where you're getting the real-time control of usage versus costs. Larger buildings where the construction is then handed over to someone separate for the operation and support are really starting to look at how do you plan for real-time control of usage as buildings are getting built rather than implementing them downstream. One of the moving forward to the next technological trend coming into our industry is really the rise of 3D printing. One of the areas, and it's been a bit of a novelty up until fairly recently. So many of you have probably heard of or even seen, possibly even toyed with 3D printing. And at a high level, it really is the process of making a physical object from an electronic 3D digital model, typically by laying down many thin layers of materials in succession. We've probably seen 3D printing of making of plastic objects, a toy gun, for example, a spare part on a Meccano set, for example. But increasingly, whereas the 3D printing is able to be used on building construction industries, if you like, it is still in its infancy, and it will start to have an impact over the next 5 years. The costs for 3D printing technology are still restrictive, and the advancement of technology, especially in Australia, it's still very much a niche market. But it is coming, and it is coming in the short to medium term time frame, so in the next 2 to 5 years. The initial uses of 3D printing in the building and construction industry will likely appear in the facilities maintenance and repair industries, or areas where it is hard to get replacement parts for. But increasingly, in the design of larger constructions, it is starting to influence the choice of materials up front. So rather than just having the ability to implement a construction technology like 3D printing for repair and maintenance and replacement of objects, we are seeing a trend in the industry where bill of materials are starting to specify in advance choices of products that can be 3D printed. So you're starting to see it influence upstream design choices of materials. It may be more costly to install and implement 3D printed products at the onset of a product, at the onset of a project, but the cost advantages downstream through the whole life cycle are starting to stack up. And again, 3D printing will have an advantage in regional, rural and remote constructions. When you think of infrastructure projects in, to support large gas pipelines, for example, or infrastructure projects to support, demountable housing, to support larger construction projects in regional, rural and remote areas. Just wanted to sort of pause and offer to the audience, if you have any questions on this, feel free. Again, we'll read out the questions and offer an answer. And for any questions that we can't answer in real time or online, I will take on notice and provide a follow-up in the coming days. We'll just move on to our next session then, which is on life cycle costing. And really, this is almost in conjunction with some of the other trends we've seen, especially around electronic procurement and an example of 3D printing. So life cycle costing, in terms of its analysis and assessment and the tools to use it, is really a tool for the evaluation of the environmental aspects of a product and service through all stages of its life cycle. It is coming into its own as a formal and recognised science in its own right, and there are training courses and education courses starting to crop up now, both online short courses as well as it's being embedded in construction tertiary courses, degrees and diplomas and what have you. And the initial focus of life cycle costing is really to do with energy and embodied energy and calculating that in terms of the choice of product used to minimise environmental damage or environmental footprint. When it's applied, it is really about from the cradle to operation. In the building and construction industry, once a component product or the construction in its entirety has passed its operation phase and is really into a reuse and end use of life thing, either grave or being reused, the life cycle cost assessment is really excluded as part of that, because that generally is done as another project or another operation or another business. Life cycle cost assessment can be an effective tool for monitoring and improving environmental efficiency. It is one really only starting to get looked at by the larger national and international construction organisations at the moment that do the very large constructions, for example, like Barangaroo in New South Wales, or some of the larger construction in WA or Victoria. If you want to get the most out of life cycle cost assessment, it is one of those things that really has to be done at the start, at the project initiation phase of any construction project, to understand what your choices are regarding embodied energy, the analysis and assessment of that, and to align with Australian standard method of measurement, which is all starting to happen now in terms of aligning life cycle cost assessment to a standard method of measurement. So life cycle cost assessment is really a set of analysis guides and tools that the building industry should be starting to look at to take on what's the total cost of energy for the creation, operation and support of a construction, and what things do we put in place to minimise that. Akin to minimising an organisation's carbon or a construction project's carbon footprint. The final technology trend is really about sustainability. And sustainability is one of those often overused terms that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. The key thing I want to emphasise here is that by sustainability the move to self-sufficiency. And it's really the rise of a heightened sense of awareness, generally speaking, especially in the world of the consumer, and starting to be recognised in the world of the building construction industry, of the market for greener, ethical and more sustainable construction sector. Generally speaking, it's felt that a more sustainable construction sector is the need for that is greater than ever. Clients, be they government, be they big businesses, be they the property industry looking for new buildings, be it the residential industry, starting to demand more sustainable practices. The legislation mandating this is becoming increasingly stringent. I'll give you an example of self-sufficiency, and it's really to do with forestry and trees, but it's probably the most obvious one. If a forest grows at the rate of 1 tree a year, then the harvest rate should only be 1 tree a year to maintain its self-sufficiency. Cutting down all the trees cuts down the rate of what you can produce year after year. So really only harvesting what you can grow. How it will be used. Supply chain sustainability is starting to really permeate from the top organised construction industry organisations and companies and influencers down through to the secondary subcontractors and tier 2 providers, if you like. It's not worth the top organisations mandating time and time again the lowest possible cost if it's driving the organisations below them into bankruptcy year after year. So supply chain sustainability is also the need for all levels of the supply chain to operate in a self-sufficient manner. So not just drive out cost per se, but operate at a sustainable profit. The understanding of ethical sourcing. So there's 2 ways that this is coming prevalent in our industry. Number one, is it being sourced responsibly and ethically? So, for example, we're not using child slave labour, for example, in the supply, sourcing and procurement of a certain product. And then secondly, is it being sourced from an environmental and environmentally ethically friendly perspective? Moving to becoming, supply chain sustainability is moving to influence all stages of the construction life cycle, from product creation, transportation, wholesale and distribution, importing, the services to install, the services to configure, and the services to support. Well, that really covers the 5 key technology trends that I was looking to raise on today's webinar. The final section of this is really around Q&A session, and also to cover just some guidance in terms of how to manage technology in a changing world. These 5 key trends, and this is just a 5 at this point. There are many other technologies that we could cater for and reference today, but these are just some of the top 5. Are symptomatic of a massively changing world, if you like. And it increases the pressure on us all to stay up to date, both formally and informally. So by formally, undertaking training courses, and informally, the need to stay connected to your various communities, self-paced training such as webinars like this, and the need to stay up to date in terms of the trends. It is a juggling act in terms of balancing the cost to a project versus the cost to a business. Quite often, new technologies, such as the ones I've referenced today and others, could be more expensive on an individual project, but cheaper to run when you're looking at it from an overall business. Increasingly, technology is being viewed and seen as a differentiator. The businesses that understand and embrace and adopt technology, including the ones we've referenced today, will increasingly use that as a differentiator. And the pace of changing is quickening. The change we've seen for the last 10 to 25 years will double and triple every 5 years or thereabouts from here on in. Finally, what you see on the screen is where to go for some more information. These are some key international and Australian-led initiatives. So from the procurement perspective, from the supply chain perspective, from BIM, building information modelling, and procurement perspective as well, and the World Building Design Guide has a lot of resources on life cycle cost analysis. I know there haven't been many questions, but that was pretty much it from myself. Thank you very much. If there are any other questions, be it now or in the future, my details can be circulated through James and Cheryl of the Australian Construction Industry Forum. Before signing off and handing back to James, there is, as part of the partnership between Pointsbuild and the Australian Construction Industry Forum, a discount for ACIF members and subscribers for any education programs you might like to consider from Pointsbuild's website. So if you go to Pointsbuild's website, pointsbuild.com.au, browse and register for various training courses. At the shopping cart perspective, key in this code, and that'll give you 10% off any training courses. And if you have any queries about that, feel free to contact us on the 1300 number on your screen. Thank you all. I hope that's been a very quick introduction and overview to some of the key technology trends. And I'll sort of hand back to James and the ACIF now. If there are any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, Michael, we've had a couple of questions come in. Sure. Bernardo has asked if you could go back to the slide that has some of the reference points, which was a couple slides ago. And then we've also had another question about, can you give us an example of hot life cycle costing according to ASMM?
So at the moment, very good questions. So on the screen you have the resources, the list of resources, and these, the attendees will get access to these slides. So you'll have access to these links after today's session. An example of life cycle costing with respect to the Australian Standard Method of Management. There is current debate at the moment in terms of how some of the life cycle costing tools out there, and there's a few, not many, there are a few, and I can find them and I'll send them through, are interpreting the standard of measurement. And so there's disagreement in terms of calculating embodied energy and the life cycle cost of energy with respect to bill of materials and providing standardised responses. There's a few projects that are considering this, and what I'll do is there's a couple of projects in Sydney and there's a couple of projects in Scotland at the moment looking at this. I don't know if I'm able to reference them directly, but if I can, I'll provide links to those projects afterwards, if you like. So really it comes down to a difference in interpretation of how to measure embodied energy through life cycle tools as opposed to measuring energy through bill of materials and the Australian Standard Method of Measurement, or ASMM. Are there any other questions?
Michael, we have another audience question, and that is regarding 3D printing, and the question is what courses are available for 3D printing technology regarding its development for the construction industry?
I believe that it's starting to get involved starting to get referenced as part of a construction course with the University of Newcastle, as well as the University of Technology. There is no tertiary course on 3D printing in its own right, but various construction management courses are looking at including it in a 3rd and 4th year course for undergraduates. And again, I can provide the links to those. Individual 3D printing companies are often running courses on their own individual technologies, much like computer-aided design software companies often offer courses in their own CAD design tools as well. And I can follow up on the 3D printing courses. It is still very early days for Australia in the 3D printing industry.
All right, no, thanks for that. And another question that I have, I'm curious to know what's the difference between blockchain and a payment system like PayPal? I mean, I guess with PayPal, you're still using a third party like a bank or a credit card, and you're not necessarily giving your credit card details directly to a vendor, an online vendor. But I mean, what advantages does blockchain offer over a system like PayPal?
So, very good question. Thank you. So, the easiest way to think of it is, instead of there being 2 to 3 intermediaries between a buyer and a seller, the buyer, the buyer's bank, the transaction processing engine, the seller's bank, and the seller, blockchain provides a secure trust mechanism to allow the buyer and seller to interact directly. So you can cut out the bank for the buyer and the bank for the seller, and potentially the intermediary, which in your example is PayPal. PayPal is effectively collecting money from someone, holding it for a short amount. Once the transaction's gone ahead, paying the seller, and they collect a commission along the way. So it's what's known as a transaction intermediary. Blockchain will allow buyers and sellers to securely trust each other and interact directly without the need for banking intermediaries, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
The advantages are twofold. Sorry, just quickly, the advantages will be twofold. Speed, so it speeds up the transaction time, and cost. You won't, both sides won't be paying additional exorbitant transaction costs. And
is blockchain totally secure? I heard I read a news story about a large, well, actually it wasn't blockchain, I beg your pardon, I think it was maybe Bitcoin, a large $660 million worth of Bitcoin was stolen online via hacking. But I guess it raises the question whether it be Bitcoin or blockchain, how secure are they?
So blockchain and Bitcoin are two very different things. Blockchain is the underlying ledger and encryption system. Bitcoin is one example of what's called a digital currency. Blockchain is secure and is now in the process of being demonstrated as such. So there's some large trials of blockchain technology in Australia, in the agricultural industry, in the banking and services industry, and in the chemical industry at the moment. So people like organisations like the Australian Stock Exchange are running some very sophisticated, very scaled pilots of blockchain technology. It is and has been proven to be secure. what is still being worked out is the intersection of digital currencies. For example, Bitcoin is just one example of a digital currency. And if that's stored offline and could be, quote unquote, hacked, what happens then? And there have been some high profile piracies of digital currencies at this point.
Right, no, thanks for that. And with smart metering, could you explain to us a little bit more about smart metering? I'm curious to know a bit more about that.
Smart metering, what's an example? Traditional energy meters such as gas, electricity, have had to be physically read by a technician, and quite often the billing systems are run by the suppliers or the distributors of those energy systems make assessments and guesses on the metering before they send out a bill, if you like. And quite often there's a large, very inefficient process between the estimate and the actual, and some sort of reconciliation process. Smart metering allows you to do two things. First of all, understand by effectively connecting that device to a recording system, that can be read remotely rather than sending a technician to do that. Secondly, you can then provide accurate billing based on that metering. So rather than an estimate of a bill, you get the accurate reading. And then thirdly, you can then control what's happening at that meter and that point remotely. So for example, automatically dimming lights if people aren't using a room to lower the metering. Using energy through off-peak periods rather than energy through peak periods. The initial benefit for these will be at the point of operation, maintenance and support for the building and construction industry. But interestingly, it is starting to get into the design of smart metering is starting to influence the design of building constructions, as well as retrofitting existing constructions. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. It's something that yeah, I think there's not too much information out there at the moment on smart metering, and it's something that yeah, I'd definitely like to do more reading on it. It seems like a very interesting technology. And the final question for me is that, I mean, we hear the use of the word disruption in terms of technology, and that certain technologies will be disruptive, quote unquote, and it doesn't have a negative connotation. It means that they'll be transformative technologies. But in your opinion, how do we know what technologies will actually be disruptive or transformative? And is it just a case of we can only know after the event, or is there any way of knowing as technology is emerging which ones will be very disruptive or transformative in the construction industry?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Picking which technologies may be disruptive or not is a bit of a dark art. I guess you could say the word disruptive, especially in the technology-based industry, is often overused. And with respect to the building and construction industry, I would classify or think of disruptive technologies as individual technologies that could impact the whole industry. A new way of laying bricks, for example, may not impact the whole industry. It's possibly a good technology, but I would probably argue it's not necessarily impacting the whole industry. Picking which ones are going to be disruptive is unknown at this point. There are, you look at the rise of global social media platforms, the Facebooks, the LinkedIns, the Twitters of the world, the YouTubes of the world. And at the time, no one knew if they were going to be fully disruptive or not. People had a hunch, but no one was certain. Of the 5 technology trends we've covered today, I suspect the 2 that are really going to be disruptive to the whole industry will be blockchain and blockchain and supply chain sustainability will be the key ones. Ensuring that your supply chain is self-sufficient and sustainable will be a key trend and technology trend into the future. And likewise, the use of a secure, encrypted, distributed trust mechanisms like blockchain for transactions will also drive down the cost, drive up efficiencies, and improve the industry no end.
All right. Thanks very much for that, Michael. If we don't have any further questions from the audience, we'll bring it to a close. So,
James, I do think there was a further question. Bernardo, who's a civil engineer from Brazil, had gone online and asked specific questions around some of the training courses. Is that something we want to take offline, Michael, or would you like to talk to him about some of the national?
I'm happy to pick up with Bernardo directly offline.
Okay, excellent. Are there any other questions from the audience, Julie, that you can see?
That's all.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Michael, and thanks very much for the informative webinar today. And I'm sure it was very valuable for everybody listening. Thanks again to yourself and our other partners for your support of ASIF's work. And we have more ASIF webinars in the coming weeks and months. To find out more and to register, visit www.asif.com.au/webinar. And I believe, Michael, that ASIF subscribers get a 10% discount on your courses. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. And I'll send the link. We'll send through the link when the presentation slides get circulated.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, well, thanks again, Michael, and thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Thank you.